She sent the wrong text to a stranger. He read it and couldn't look away. That one careless message pulled Adaeze Okonkwo into the orbit of the most feared man in Seoul, and from the moment their worlds collided, nothing would ever be the same. He was Han Seung-jun, ghost king of the Korean underworld, a man whose name made politicians sweat and rivals disappear. She was a curvy Nigerian pharmacist working the night shift, exhausted and broke, and accidentally lit a fire inside a man who had been cold for 5 years. Welcome to Afro-Korean Story Hub, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The text was meant for her ex-boyfriend Marcus. Just 5 words, typed quickly in the dark of her break room, a last desperate attempt to remember what warmth felt like. Baby, I'm not wearing anything. She hit send before she noticed the wrong number. The digits were transposed by a single digit. One mistake, one wrong tap, and somewhere across Seoul in a penthouse that overlooked the Han River like a throne overlooking a kingdom, a phone lit up on a glass desk. Han Seung-jun stared at the screen for a long time. He was in the middle of a meeting, 7 men seated around a table, each one dangerous in his own right. He had been talking about the Busan route, about the Yakuza contact who was skimming, about the accountant who needed to be reminded of the consequences of disloyalty. And then his private phone buzzed. The one only 3 people in the world had the number for. His jaw tightened as he read the message. Then he read it again. Something moved through him, quiet and unexpected, like a window cracking open in a sealed room. He stood without explanation and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Behind him, his men waited in perfect silence. They had learned not to speak when he moved like that. His second-in-command, Oh Kyung-min, watched his boss's back and said nothing. Seung-jun typed back, I think this was meant for someone else, but I'm listening if you want to keep talking. Elizabeth saw the reply and dropped her phone. She scrambled to pick it up off the hospital break room floor, her face burning hot. She typed back frantically, Oh my God, I am so sorry. Please delete that. Please forget you ever saw it. His reply came within seconds. I already have it memorized. Who are you? She should have blocked the number. Every sensible instinct she owned told her to lock the screen and pretend it never happened. But she was 3 weeks behind on rent, 8 months out of a 3-year relationship, and so profoundly lonely that a stranger's curiosity felt like sunlight on cold skin. So she answered, nobody important, just someone who texted the wrong person. He was quiet for a moment. Then, whoever you were texting clearly doesn't deserve you. Go to sleep. I'll be thinking about your message. She stared at those words until her break timer went off. Her whole body felt strange. Warm in a way she didn't have words for. She did not sleep well that night. The next day, Elizabeth told herself the exchange meant nothing. She was a practical woman. She had a pharmacy degree from the University of Lagos, a work visa sponsored by Seoul General Hospital, where she dispensed medication and translated instructions for the growing West African patient community, and a mother back in Enugu who called every Sunday and asked when Elizabeth was going to find a nice man and stop giving her gray hair. She was not the kind of woman who got drawn in by a mysterious stranger who texted back at midnight. She went to work. She counted pills. She translated. She ate rice from a container she'd packed the night before. And at exactly 11:47 that evening, her phone buzzed, unknown number, same one from last night. Did you eat today? She blinked at the screen. What, you sounded tired yesterday. People who are tired often forget to eat. Did you eat? She almost laughed. Who are you? Someone who has been thinking about your message since midnight. Did you eat? She looked down at the empty container on the counter beside her. Yes, good. He typed it simply, like a period at the end of a sentence. Like he was satisfied with that alone. This continued for 4 days. Not long conversations, short ones. He asked if she slept. He asked if her shift was long. Once he sent a single question in the middle of the afternoon. Do you like the rain? She had been standing at the pharmacy window watching water streak down the glass, and she had answered honestly, I used to. It reminds me of home now. He hadn't replied for a while. Then, what changed? And she had typed, I came here alone. He hadn't responded to that one at all. But the following morning, a food delivery arrived at the hospital's main desk addressed to the night pharmacy. Inside were 3 containers of perfectly made jollof rice from a Nigerian restaurant she had mentioned offhandedly 2 days earlier, one she had never been able to afford on her salary. There was no note, but her phone buzzed at the exact moment she opened the bag. Eat something that reminds you of home. She pressed the phone against her chest and stood there for a very long time. A few days later, he asked to meet her. She said no. He said he understood. She spent that entire night second-guessing herself. She said yes 3 days after that. The restaurant he chose was private, contained within a building she was fairly certain was not open to the public. A man in a dark coat met her at the door and walked her through a space that smelled of cedar and expensive wine to a room separated from the rest by frosted glass. Han Seung-jun was already seated. He stood when she entered, and Elizabeth stopped walking. The photos online, the ones she had eventually found when she searched the numbers area code and cross-referenced the restaurant booking name, had not prepared her for him in person. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been sculpted by someone who understood that beauty and danger were not opposites. There was a scar above his left jaw, thin as a thread, barely visible. His eyes were very dark and they were fixed entirely on her. She watched him process her. The curve of her hips in the green wrap dress she had agonized over for 40 minutes. The natural hair she had picked out into a full crown. The way she stood, chin lifted, hands clasped loosely in front of her because she was nervous, and that was how she held herself when she was nervous. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been searching for without knowing it. "Elizabeth," he said. His voice was low and careful, like he was testing the sound of her name in the air between them. It was exactly what she had imagined it would sound like. Which was a problem. "You didn't tell me your name," she said instead of hello. "Han Seung-jun." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit." She sat. He sat. A server appeared and vanished and appeared again. The food arrived in courses she did not fully taste because she was too focused on the man across the table who watched her the way storms watch the sea, like he was already inside it. They talked for 3 hours. He asked questions the way someone does when they have already done research and want to know if the reality matches the file. He knew she was a pharmacist. He knew she was Nigerian. He knew she had been in Seoul for 14 months. He did not know that she took the long route home every night because the shorter one passed a couple who argued in front of their building, and it made her unbearably sad. She told him that. She didn't know why. His expression shifted when she said it, something moving underneath the control, and he said quietly, "You're a very perceptive person. It means you notice things that hurt more than other people do." She looked at him across the table. "Who are you really?" A long pause. Someone who needed to know if you were real. She made him drive her home that night. She made him stop 2 blocks away from her apartment building because she wasn't ready to let him see where she lived yet. He didn't argue. He simply stopped the car and said goodnight and watched her walk until she turned the corner. His phone was already in his hand when he drove away. He called Oh Kyungmin. "She's real," he said. "Keep the building secure. Round the clock." Nobody touches that block. The following week, Elizabeth found out who Han Seung-jun was by accident. A colleague at the hospital pulled up a news article about a court case that had been dismissed for lack of evidence, a sprawling organized crime investigation that had collapsed under mysterious circumstances. The man in the photograph was not quite the same man she had eaten dinner with, but he was close enough. Sharper, colder. Standing outside a courthouse in a suit that cost more than Elizabeth made in 3 months, surrounded by attorneys and men in dark coats, looking at the camera like it had personally offended him. She read the article in the hospital bathroom with the door locked. Han Seung-jun, 41 years old, heir to a construction and logistics empire that everyone in Korean business circles understood was the legitimate face of something far less visible. The article didn't use the word mafia, but danced around it so carefully that it practically spelled it out in the white space between sentences. She sat on the closed lid of the toilet for a while and breathed. That evening, he texted her. "Are you free on Friday?" She typed and deleted her response 4 times. The 5th one she sent, "I know who you are." He didn't reply for 11 minutes. Then, "I know you should have told me." There was a pause. "Yes, I should have." She stared at his reply. Then, "Why didn't you?" Another pause, longer this time. "Because I wanted one conversation where you looked at me like I was just a man." She put the phone down, picked it up again. She typed, "You are just a man." He replied immediately, the fastest response he had ever sent her. "No, not usually. But with you I keep forgetting that." Friday came. She went. This time the location was different. A smaller space. A courtyard attached to a traditional hanok that he told her his grandmother had owned. There were paper lanterns strung between the eaves. Someone had set out tea. He poured it himself, which surprised her. She watched his hands, large and steady, and thought about all the things those hands might have done and found, to her considerable alarm, that the thought made her feel complicated rather than afraid. "You're not scared of me," he said. He didn't make it a question. I'm something, she said carefully. I haven't figured out what yet. Something moved across his face. He wrapped both hands around his teacup. That's more honest than most people manage. I'm a pharmacist. We don't prescribe things we haven't identified. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Quietly, briefly, like he was surprised it happened. It transformed his face completely, softened the jaw and the careful absence of expression, and Elizabeth felt something shift inside her chest like furniture being rearranged. That was the night she understood she was in real trouble. Later that week, a man named Park Woo-jin walked into the hospital pharmacy. He was around her age, charming in the easy, uncomplicated way of someone who had never needed to work very hard at being liked. He had brought flowers from the gift shop downstairs, slightly wilted, and he offered them to Elizabeth with a grin and said his aunt had recommended her specifically, and that he was grateful, and that if she ever wanted to get coffee sometime he would very much like that. Elizabeth took the flowers and said she would think about it. She was not thinking about it. But she smiled politely because she was always polite and it meant nothing. She didn't mention it to Seung-jun. She wasn't sure why not. They weren't dating. They weren't anything with a name yet. They were two people who texted every day and had dinner twice a week and looked at each other in ways that left her slightly breathless afterward. That was all. Except Oh Kyung-min mentioned it to Seung-jun that same evening, because the security detail who watched Elizabeth's building had been extended to include the hospital after the second week, and one of the men had been inside the lobby when the flowers were delivered. Seung-jun received this information over the phone while standing in his office. His expression did not change. His voice did not change. He said thank you and ended the call and stood very still for a long moment looking out at the Han River. Then he called the restaurant where he and Elizabeth were scheduled to have dinner the following evening and moved their reservation 2 hours earlier. He arrived before her. He was already seated when she walked in, and when she sat down he looked at her with the full weight of his attention in a way he usually kept carefully moderated, like he was deciding something, and said, "Tell me about the man at your pharmacy yesterday." Elizabeth went very still. Then, carefully, a patient. He brought flowers for his aunt. He brought flowers for you. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even heated. It was delivered in the same controlled low tone he used for everything. But something underneath it was not controlled at all, and Elizabeth could hear it. "Seung-jun," she said. "Nothing happened. I know nothing happened." His jaw was tight. He looked down at the table, then back up at her. "I know that." He paused. "I don't like how I felt when I heard about it." She studied him. He looked like it was costing him something to say this. Like the words were pulled out against resistance. "How did you feel?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Like I needed to make sure you knew you were mine before anyone else got the idea that you weren't." The air went out of the room. Elizabeth's heart was doing something inconvenient and rapid. "I'm not yours," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Not yet," he said. "But I'm working on it." She didn't sleep that night. Not properly. She lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling with Seung-jun's words sitting in her chest like a stone dropped in still water, sending rings outward in every direction. Not yet, but I'm working on it. She had told herself on the walk home that it meant nothing. That men like him said things like that the way other people used punctuation, casually, without full weight. But she had watched his face when he said it, and there had been nothing casual about it. Nothing at all. The following morning she found a package outside her apartment door. No note, no delivery label, just a plain black bag containing a pair of boots she had paused in front of for 40 seconds 3 weeks ago while walking past a shop with Seung-jun. She had not bought them. She had made a small sound and kept walking. She had not thought he noticed. She called him. He picked up on the second ring. "You can't do this," she said. "I can," he said. "I just did, Seung-jun." Her voice was careful. "I'm not a woman you can buy things for and expect nothing to shift. I don't expect anything." A pause. "I just noticed you wanted them. That's worse," she said. His silence on the other end felt like a smile. That afternoon, a new threat arrived in the form of a woman named Shin Jae-yeon, and she arrived the way all truly dangerous things do, looking completely harmless. She was elegant, perhaps 35, with the kind of polish that comes from decades of wealth and the kind of beauty that comes from both genetics and considerable investment. She appeared at the hospital pharmacy, asking for a consultation about a specific compound medication, and she was perfectly pleasant and entirely correct about everything she said medically. But she looked at Elizabeth the whole time with an expression Elizabeth had seen before on women who believed they had prior claim to something. The expression of someone assessing a replacement. Elizabeth didn't mention it to Seung-jun. She tucked it away and kept working. He mentioned it to her. 3 days later, over the dinner they had now accepted as a standing arrangement, he said, "Jaeyeon came to see you." Elizabeth set down her chopsticks. "She came to your pharmacy. How did she know where you work?" Elizabeth looked at him steadily. "Who is she?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Someone my family has been suggesting I marry for approximately 2 years." The word marry landed in the space between them like a weight. Elizabeth picked her chopsticks back up. "Is that something you're considering?" "No." He said it immediately, with no hesitation, looking directly at her. "It has never been something I was considering, but she knows I've been seen with you. She has eyes everywhere, and so do the people around my family." His expression was careful, controlled, but something moved underneath it. "I'm sorry she came to your workplace. It won't happen again. You can't control what she does. I can make it not worth her while to try again." Elizabeth searched his face. "Seung-jun, I'm not interested in being in the middle of whatever this is between you and your family's expectations. You're not in the middle of anything." He leaned forward slightly. "You're at the center of something else entirely. Something I haven't felt in a very long time, and I'm not willing to walk away from because Jaeyeon is inconvenient." She held his gaze. He held hers right back. He did not blink or look away or soften the intensity of it by even a fraction. Elizabeth had met men who were confident before. She had never met one who made confidence look like grief, like something earned through enormous personal cost. She looked down first. She hated that she looked down first. That night he walked her to her corner, 2 blocks from her building as always. But instead of saying good night and letting her go, he said her name once. She stopped. She turned around. He closed the distance between them slowly enough that she could have stepped back at any point. She didn't step back. When he was close enough that she could see the faint scar above his jaw in the streetlight, he lifted his hand and brushed his thumb across her cheek in something that was barely a touch, more the suggestion of one, and said very quietly, "I need you to know that nothing about this is casual for me. Nothing. Not one single thing." Elizabeth's breath was not behaving correctly. "What is it then?" she managed. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "I'm still figuring out the word for it. But whatever it is, it started with a wrong number, and it's been growing every day since, and I am not built for things I can't control, but with you I find I don't particularly care." She was very close to doing something that could not be undone. She could feel the warmth of him and smell the cedar of his coat, and her heart was loud and unreasonable. She stepped back. She needed to step back. "Good night, Seung-jun," she said. Her voice was almost steady. "Good night, Elizabeth." He didn't move. He watched her walk away with the particular quality of attention he always gave her. Like watching was enough. Like he was patient enough to wait for whatever came next. It was the patience that undid her. She had never in her life been waited for. A few days later, the situation with Jaeyeon escalated. Elizabeth arrived at work to find that a formal complaint had been filed against her with hospital administration. The complaint alleged that she had dispensed incorrect medication to a patient the previous month. A charge that was not only false, but easily disproved by the dispensing records she kept with the meticulous precision of someone who understood that a single error in her field could kill a person. But the complaint had been filed by someone with connections, and it had to be investigated. And for 3 days, Elizabeth walked into a building where her colleagues looked at her with expressions ranging from cautious sympathy to barely concealed curiosity. She did not tell Seung-jun. She handled it herself, compiling her records, sitting through the investigation, explaining herself with the composed professionalism that had carried her through every hard thing she had ever faced alone. The complaint was dismissed. Her record was cleared. She went home that Friday evening and sat in her apartment in the dark for a long time. Her phone buzzed. "Are you all right?" Seung-jun's text arrived at 7:10, the exact time she usually messaged him if she wasn't already on her way to meet him. She typed, "Fine, just tired," he replied. "I'm coming over." She sat up. "No, you don't know where I live." His response came after a brief pause. "Elizabeth, I have known where you live since the 2nd week." She stared at the screen. Then she got up and opened her door. He was already at the end of her hallway, still in the suit he'd worn to wherever he'd been that day, with his coat over one arm and his expression carefully neutral and his eyes anything but. She should have been angry. She thought she was angry. But she looked at him standing in the corridor of her unremarkable apartment building and felt instead profoundly, embarrassingly relieved. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes," he agreed. He didn't apologize for it. He just waited. She stepped aside and let him in. He sat on her small sofa and looked at her apartment with the attention he gave everything. Reading the space the way she was beginning to understand, he read most things, looking for information, for meaning, for what wasn't being said. The textbooks on the shelf. The photograph of her mother and her two sisters pinned to the wall above her desk. The half-finished cup of tea on the table. The absence of anything decorative except a single small plant on the windowsill. "You've been here 14 months and there's still nothing on the walls," he said. "I kept thinking it was temporary," she said. He looked at her. "Is it?" She sat in the chair across from him. "Someone filed a complaint against me at work this week. A false one. It's been dismissed, but Dayon, probably. I don't have proof." His expression went very still in the way she had learned meant the controlled exterior was working hardest. "I'll handle it. I don't need you to handle it. I handled it. I know you did." He looked at her steadily. "You would handle everything by yourself if you could. You've been handling everything by yourself for a very long time." She said nothing. "He wasn't wrong. Let me help you." He said it quietly, not as an offer with conditions, just as a thing he wanted. "Let someone handle something for you for once. I'm asking you to let it be me." The silence in the apartment felt full. Outside, a car passed and the headlights moved across the wall and disappeared. "You terrify me," she said. She hadn't planned to say it, I know. His voice didn't change. "You terrify me too." His dark eyes held hers. "But I haven't run." He stayed for 2 hours. They talked the way they always did, about everything and nothing, about her mother's cooking and his grandmother's hanok, and the years he'd spent in London after university that he described as productive and lonely in equal measure. He made her laugh twice, and both times he looked at her mouth like the sound was something he wanted to put in his pocket and keep. When he left, he stood in her doorway and looked back at her. "Hang something on the walls," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because this is your home," he said. "Not a temporary stop. Your home." She didn't respond. He didn't wait for one. He left. She stood in the doorway of her apartment for a long time after she heard the elevator doors close. The following morning, she bought a print from the market near her building. A blue and orange abstract, large enough to fill the wall above her sofa. She hung it up herself, using a hammer she borrowed from her neighbor, and stood back and looked at it for a while. Then she took a photo and sent it to Seung-jun without comment. His reply was one word. "Good." A week later, the danger arrived properly. It came in the form of 2 men who approached Elizabeth after her evening shift as she walked to the bus stop 2 streets from the hospital. They were not subtle about what they were. They had the particular economy of movement that she had seen in the men who always seemed to be somewhere near Seung-jun, except these men were not his. She felt it immediately, the difference in energy, the way they positioned themselves with the specific geometry of people who intended to use the space they occupied. One of them said her name. She kept walking. The other stepped into her path. "Han Seung-jun has an interest in you," the first man said in careful English. "That interest is a problem for people we work for. We would like to have a conversation." Elizabeth looked at him. Her hands were very steady. Her heart was not. "We can have it here," she said. "I'm not going anywhere with you." The second man reached for her arm. What happened next happened very fast. There were sounds from behind her, and then 3 of Seung-jun's men materialized from positions she had not noticed, and the 2 strangers were on the ground before Elizabeth had fully processed the sequence of events. Oh Kyung-min appeared at her elbow. His expression was almost apologetic. "We need to move you," he said. "Please come with me." She came. She sat in the back of a car that drove her across the city in a route she didn't try to follow, and she kept her breathing controlled and her hands flat on her knees, because she had learned a long time ago that falling apart was something she could do later, alone, when it was safe to. Seung-jun was waiting for her at the compound. She had never been here before. The scale of it registered peripherally, the high walls and the guarded gate, and the interior that was both colder and more beautiful than she had imagined. He was standing in the entrance when she walked in, and the look on his face when he saw her stopped her in the doorway. She had seen him controlled. She had seen him careful and deliberate and precise. She had not seen him look the way he looked right now, jaw tight, eyes burning, every line of his body pulled taut with something that was not anger, or not only anger. He crossed to her in 3 steps and took her face in both hands and looked at her the way someone looks at something they very nearly lost. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough. She shook her head. He exhaled, slow and ragged, and his forehead dropped to hers. His hands were trembling. She could feel them. "Seung-jun," she said softly, "I know who sent them." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "This ends tonight. Don't do anything that can't be undone." His eyes were dark and very still. Elizabeth, I mean it, a long pause. His thumbs moved gently against her face. Then quietly, stay here tonight. Don't go back to that apartment until I tell you it's secure. His voice had dropped to something rough with a feeling he was not quite containing. I need to know you're safe. I need to know where you are. She looked at him for a long moment. The fear was still present, a hum beneath everything, but underneath the fear something else was present too, something that had been building since the night of the wrong text, since the jollof rice delivery and the boots and the wall print and the 2 hours on her small sofa. Something she was running out of defenses against. Okay, she said. I'll stay. She did not sleep immediately. She lay in the guest room of Han Seung-jun's compound listening to the particular silence of a heavily secured building, which was not silence at all, but a layered quiet composed of distant footsteps and the hum of surveillance equipment, and the knowledge that somewhere beyond these walls, the man she was trying not to love too quickly was dealing with consequences she had not fully asked about. She thought about Marcus, the man she had meant to text that night months ago. She could barely remember his face anymore. That felt significant. At some point before dawn, she finally slept. She woke to the smell of coffee and found a tray outside her door. Not left by staff, she realized when she saw the handwriting on the small folded card beside the cup. His handwriting, precise and slightly angular. It said, "Breakfast is in the main room when you're ready. Take your time." She dressed and found him in a room that faced east, flooded with morning light, reading something on a tablet that he set face down when she walked in. He looked like he had not slept. His eyes were clear but shadowed, his jaw dark with overnight growth, his shirt from yesterday still on but the collar open. He looked, she thought, more human than she had ever seen him. Less architecture and more person. Did you handle it? She asked. She sat across from him, yes. His voice was even. The people who sent those men have been made to understand that you are not an available pressure point. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. What does that mean exactly? It means they will not try again. She looked at him carefully. Is anyone dead? He met her eyes. No. He paused. I considered it. She didn't flinch. She had spent enough time in his orbit now to understand that the considered it was the information, not the didn't. He was telling her he had chosen restraint. For her, probably. Or because of her. She wasn't sure there was a difference. Seung-jun, she said. How long can you keep doing this? Protecting me, managing threats, staying ahead of whatever comes next because of who you are. His jaw tightened. As long as necessary, that isn't an answer. It's the only answer I have. He stood and walked to the window. The morning light caught the line of his profile, and she watched him the way she had been trying not to. The width of his shoulders. The careful stillness he kept around himself like armor. I know what you're asking, he said without turning. You're asking whether being near me is worth the risk. Whether I'm worth the risk. She was quiet. He turned. His eyes found hers across the room and held them. I can't answer that for you. I can tell you that I have spent 5 years building walls high enough that nothing could reach me, and in the 7 months since you sent me the wrong text message, those walls are completely gone. He crossed toward her slowly. I can tell you that the idea of you walking out of here and out of my life produces in me a feeling that is entirely outside my experience, and I don't know what to do with it except tell you the truth. She was on her feet without quite deciding to stand. He stopped 2 steps away. His control was something enormous and visible, like a current he was holding back by force. What is the truth? She asked. His voice, when it came, was very quiet. I'm in love with you, Elizabeth. I have been for months. And I know what I am and what my life costs the people near me, and I know that is not a fair thing to put on someone who deserves peace. But I am asking you anyway. I am asking you to choose this. To choose me. The room was very still. She stepped forward and closed the remaining distance between them and put her hand flat against his chest. She felt his heartbeat under her palm, faster than his face showed, rapid and real. He went perfectly motionless, like he was afraid to breathe. You are the most frightening person I have ever met, she said. And I have been trying to stay sensible about you for 7 months, and I am completely out of sensible. His hand came up and covered hers against his chest. He kissed her. It was nothing like the almost touch outside her building weeks ago. It was certain and searching and full of everything that had been building since a wrong number lit up his phone at midnight. And she kissed him back with the same certainty, her other hand in the fabric of his shirt, his arm coming around her, careful and then less careful. The 7 months of wanting finally finding somewhere to go, later, much later. She sat beside him on the long sofa in that light-filled room, her head on his shoulder, his hand covering hers. The morning had fully arrived. Somewhere in the compound, she could hear the compound beginning its day. She felt unexpectedly at rest. Then her own fear arrived right on schedule. She felt it the way she always did, a cold tightening behind her sternum, a voice that sounded reasonable and was not. "He will see you clearly now," the voice said. "In the daylight, without the momentum of the moment. He'll see what you actually are, a woman from somewhere else, a pharmacist with a small apartment and borrowed boots, someone temporary in his enormous permanent world. And he will be kind about it because he is a particular kind of man, but he will pull back." She sat up. He noticed immediately. His hand went still. "Elizabeth, I should go," she said. "I should get back, work tomorrow." He turned to look at her and his eyes were too perceptive and she could not hold them. She stood. She looked for her bag. "Elizabeth." His voice was careful. "What's happening? Nothing. It's morning, it was late." She was moving too quickly and she knew it and couldn't stop. He stood. He didn't reach for her. He just stood and watched her find her coat and watched her not look at him and said very quietly, "You're running." She stopped. "You're afraid," he said. His voice held no accusation, just recognition. The same recognition she had heard in him before when he saw things in her she had not said aloud. "You think now that it's morning? I've changed my mind." She didn't answer. Her hands were tight on her bag strap. "I haven't," he said. "I won't. You don't know that. I do." She finally looked at him. He was standing in the morning light looking at her with his whole heart visible on his face, and it was so much she almost looked away again. "You are always going to be afraid," he said gently. "That's not something I can take from you. But I need you to know that your fear is not information about me. It's information about what you've survived." He moved toward her slowly. "And I'm not going anywhere, Elizabeth. I'm not Marcus. I'm not whoever made you believe that love is something that gets taken back." Her throat was tight. She didn't trust her voice. He stopped in front of her. He raised both hands and held them open, not reaching, just offered. "Come back," he said, "or don't. But make the choice from what's real, not from what you're afraid might happen." She looked at his open hands for a long moment. Then she put her bag down. Then she put her hands in his. He exhaled and pulled her in and held her and did not speak. A week later, Shin Jae-yeon made her final move. She appeared at a foundation event that Seung-jun was attending, on the arm of his uncle, which explained how she'd gotten past the guest list. She made her way to Elizabeth, who had come with Seung-jun for the first time to something public, and she said with a smile that didn't reach anywhere above her chin, "You should enjoy this while it lasts." Men like Seung-jun always return to what makes sense for their world. Elizabeth looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "I spent 14 months being practical about things that matter to me. I'm done being practical." She turned back to the conversation she had been having. Jae-yeon stood there for a moment. Then she left. Seung-jun had been across the room. He had not heard the exchange. He had seen Jae-yeon approach and he had started moving immediately and arrived as she was leaving. He looked at Elizabeth. She was calm. She was smiling at something the woman beside her had said. She was completely, infuriatingly magnificent. "Are you all right?" he asked when he reached her. She looked up at him. She was fine, actually. Genuinely fine. "Yes," he studied her face. Jae-yeon said her piece. It was small. Something resolved in his expression. He took her hand. In front of the room. In front of his uncle across the floor and his associates, and the cameras that would absolutely note the gesture. He took her hand, and he did not let go of it for the rest of the evening, and by the following morning every person in his world knew exactly where Elizabeth stood. The weeks that followed were a kind of life she had not let herself imagine. She stayed 3 nights a week at the compound. He stayed 2 nights a week at her apartment, sleeping on the sofa at first until she told him the sofa was not built for someone his size, and he could sleep in the bed, and he looked at her with something warm and careful, and agreed without making it anything it didn't need to be. She put more things on her walls. He brought her plants and pretended he had not specifically researched which ones were difficult to kill. He learned the names of her sisters. She learned the name of the grandmother, whose hanok he still maintained, who had raised him after his mother died when he was 11, who had told him once that the most dangerous thing in any man's life is not his enemies, but his own closed heart. He told Elizabeth this story quietly one evening, and she understood it was not a small thing to share. The transition of his business was already in motion. She had not asked for it, and he had not announced it to her as a grand gesture. She found out when Oh Kyung-min mentioned it offhandedly, the restructuring, the severing of the roots that lived in the darkest parts of what the Han name represented. She asked Seung-jun about it that night. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't want to build something you can't stand in." She hadn't had words for that. She had simply taken his face in both hands and looked at him until he looked back. 3 months after the morning she had nearly run, she came home from a long shift to find him in her kitchen. He had made rice badly, and he was looking at it with the expression of a man who had ordered 20 people to do complicated things and could not explain why rice had defeated him. She stood in the doorway and laughed until she had to hold the frame. "It's not funny," he said. His mouth was trying not to curve. "It's very funny." She went to the kitchen and took the pot from him. "You've ruined it." "Go sit down. I followed the instructions. You followed them incorrectly." He sat at her small table and watched her fix what he'd broken, and the domesticity of the moment was so ordinary and so enormous that she had to keep her face toward the stove. "Elizabeth," he said, "there is something I want to ask you." She kept stirring. She could feel him behind her, the quality of his stillness. "Ask. I want you to move in here," he said. "Properly. Or at the compound or somewhere new. Wherever you want. But I want the two addresses to become one." She turned around. He was watching her with that particular expression. The one that she now understood was what he looked like when he wanted something so much he had stopped pretending he didn't. "That's a very large thing," she said. "Yes." His voice was steady. "I know." She looked at him. "Are you asking because it's practical?" "No." His eyes didn't leave hers. "I'm asking because I want to wake up next to you. Because I want your plants in my space, and your medical textbooks on my shelves, and the sound of you moving in the morning to be the first thing I hear." He stood slowly. "I'm asking because I have been alone in my life, even in rooms full of people, and you are the only person who has ever made me feel the opposite of that." Her eyes were doing something embarrassing. She pressed her lips together. "I'm asking," he said quietly, "because I love you, and I want to build a life with you. A real one. And I know I said I would wait, and I will still wait. But I needed you to know that's where I am standing." She crossed the kitchen and walked straight into him. His arms came around her immediately. She pressed her face into his chest and breathed him in. "Yes," she said. Her voice was muffled by his shirt. His arms tightened. "Yes," she said again, more clearly. "I'll move in." "And Seung-jun," he tilted his head down to look at her. "Ask me the other question. The one you've been not asking for 3 weeks." She had seen it in him, that particular held-back quality. He went very still. She looked up at him. His hand came up to her face. He reached into his jacket pocket with the other hand, which should have felt rehearsed and somehow didn't, and produced a ring that was simple and precisely right and looked like something he had thought about for a very long time. "Marry me," he said. No speech. No theater. Just those 2 words in his low, careful voice, and his eyes on hers, and everything he was, all of it, offered. She had spent 14 months being practical. She had spent 7 months being careful. She had spent her whole life managing her own expectations downward, protecting herself from hopping too much, carrying everything alone. She was done with all of it. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." He put the ring on her finger, and then he pulled her back in and held her with his whole self, no restraint left, and she held him back the same way. They were married 4 months later in a ceremony that was small by his world's standards and enormous by hers. Her mother flew in from Enugu and wept at the reception and told Seung-jun in Igbo-accented English that he had better be worth all the gray hair her daughter had given her, and he had listened with complete seriousness and said, "I intend to be." Her mother had looked at him for a long moment and then patted his cheek and said, "Good." He had looked slightly undone by it. Elizabeth had loved that more than she could say. 6 months after the wedding, Elizabeth looked at a test result in her bathroom and sat on the floor and laughed and cried at the same time. Then she went and found Seung-jun in his study and stood in the doorway until he looked up. His eyes read her face the way they always did, that complete and comprehensive attention she had stopped being surprised by. He stood from his chair very slowly. "Elizabeth." She held up the test. His expression did something she had never seen it do before. It simply opened. Every controlled, careful surface gone, replaced by something so unguarded and overwhelming that she had to press her hand to her mouth. He crossed the room in 2 steps and took her face in his hands and looked at her the way he had looked at her that first night in his compound when she had nearly been taken from him, like something infinitely precious that he could not believe he had been allowed to have. "We're having a baby," she said. He pressed his forehead to hers. His voice, when it came, was barely sound. "Yes." His hands shook slightly against her face, and she covered them with her own. They stood like that in the quiet of the room he had built his empire from, which was now her room too, her home, her life. The walls covered in prints she had chosen and photographs that included her sister's and his grandmother's portrait, and a single photo someone had taken without them noticing, of Seung-jun watching Elizabeth talk at a party, his whole face soft with something that looked exactly like what it was. She had sent the wrong text to a stranger. He had texted back. And something in both of them that had been cold and closed and carefully managed had recognized the other across 7,000 kilometers of digital space and refused, stubbornly and beautifully, to let go. Not bad for a wrong number. Welcome back, besties. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this one. Comment below and tell me which moment had you feeling things, and share this with someone who needs to believe in impossible love.